she had the courage to come. She used to work at the Alberni school, and she was sitting there with all these survivors. And she said, she told a story of how she found a matron beating a little girl one day with a piano leg, just killing her, right? So she grabbed the matron and whacked her to save the kid's life, right? She's hauled before John Andrews, the principal. She's fired, not the woman beating the kid, because Andrews said she plays the organ in church on Sunday, and whatever happened to that little squaw isn't as serious as losing my organist. And so, okay, in that system, you know where the kids stand. Their lives don't matter. And if you want to keep your job, you go along. And it was a hierarchical system. And you know, people often say, well, how can death camps happen? There was a really brilliant speech that the American prosecutor, Robert Jackson, chief American prosecutor, Nuremberg, he was speaking in a Jewish synagogue in the late 40s in New York. And he got up and he said, the SS were no different than you and I. He said that by and large, people who run death camps are not psychopaths. They're bureaucrats. They are in a chain of command where you are doing your job and you go home at night. And these people are all churchgoers, and they went home, and just like in the residential schools, and they can live with themselves because they're one cog psychologically in a system. And that's why any level of society, you're talking about corporate reality there. I mean, that's the way we all live, frankly, in this society. So it's not unusual. So yeah.
I'm just wondering, obviously you're putting a whole culture on trial, or trying to. I'm just wondering where you get your strength from to deal with that, and also who are your allies in this battle?
Well, the people you see on the screen, unexpected people from all over. Groups that tend to be connected to the mainstream churches or the government in any way tend to avoid me with a 10-foot barge pole. I don't know where I get my strength from a lot of the time. I know that it's from my ancestors. I know that it's from within myself. I didn't know it was there. You know, I think when you go through these things, you find a strength that you don't know you had. One of the things, and I always do this, I've got when you see where it comes from, I had a ancestor called Peter Annett, and he was a humanist philosopher in the 1700s in London. And he wrote this book called The Free Inquirer. This is the only copy in the world. And he wrote it criticizing the Church of England and the Bible. He was like he was actually a contemporary of Voltaire and the American deists, you know, like the Founding Father, which is funny. Michael Moore makes the point that the Founding Fathers of America were not Christians. They were deists. They believed reason was God. The reason was that, like other people, you know, free thinkers. So Peter was one, and he wrote this. He attacked the church and you know, for its hypocrisy, and he said, let's examine the Bible rationally. You know, could Moses have launched a rain of frogs on Pharaoh? Is that rational? You know. So anyway, the Attorney General in 1769, the Attorney General in London, seized all these, destroyed the printing press. Peter did a year's hard labor, and he was stuck in Charing Cross and at the Royal Exchange in the pillory when he was 70. And it's funny because when I first discovered this, I thought, shit, I'm the reincarnation of my ancestor. Because it's the same battle. I mean, when you think about it, it's the Church of England and the government. There's no separation between church and state. It's one gang, right? And I get my strength from that, from my ancestor. You know, the fact that he was able to stand up like that. And I get strength from the survivors. I mean, if the horror they went through, they're still able to talk about it, then mine is nothing in comparison. So it's just being able to speak. Like another example I want to give about that, William Coombs, who I mentioned before, who died in hospital. He had been going to counseling for 15 years, and it was all bullshit. I mean, he didn't ever really get to the heart of what he was carrying, right? What he had witnessed and gone through. So the only time I ever saw him get better, prior to the period just before he died, we took this, there was 50 of us, and we walked into the main Catholic Cathedral in Vancouver. And it was really neat that day because they knew we were coming, but we get there. It was Palm Sunday 2007. And there's no cops at the door, because usually there's a phalanx of Vancouver police protecting the church, right? And there were no police at the door, no security. The doors were just standing wide open. So I said, this is a sign, let's go, right? So we go in with this banner. We go to the front of the sanctuary. We stand in front of the communion table with the banner. And we're drumming, and the priests are like freaking right out. Like they're saying, like, you've invaded our sanctuary here. But we're just standing there, part of the Mass, you know, just saying, remember the children who died at your hands. And the congregation, it was funny because the congregation couldn't figure out what was going on, and so the priest kept the organist to keep playing the hymn over and over, so they're standing like, to try to drown us out, but we wouldn't go away, right? So finally, they're trying to get us out, we're not budging, and I look out and I see William, and before this, whenever William walked by that church and he heard the church bell, he started getting physically sick, because the image of the cross and those bells had brought back all of that torture that he had suffered, and sodomization, all of that stuff at a young age, right? I look out and there's William walking up and down the pews handing leaflets to people, right? And we come out of there and he stops drinking that week, right? And I was talking to him later about that, and he said to me that when he got there he was really scared, but then he saw all of us standing there and he said he didn't want to let us down. He didn't want to be cowardly in front of all of us. So that got him to come a bit more. And then being in there, he got the strength from all of us, right? And that's the way you do it. You do it together, you do it publicly, and you give people a sense that they can do something. They're not a victim anymore, right? They can confront this evil, they can name it, and that gives people what I would call some kind of recovery. I don't want to call it healing, but that's how I've seen it work. But we got to do it together, and that's the strength we all have, right? Together. So that's where I get my strength.
This may be sensitive, but what about the big media players like BBC and Radio 4? Do they not want to touch you? Do you approach them? I mean, that's...
You probably have a better sense of that than I do, what the media is like in this country, but no, they don't. There's been attempts like, I was at the Protest the Pope rally last September. I don't know if any of you made that. It was fantastic. It was like the humanist organized, when Rat Boy, as they call him, came to London. 16 million pounds was spent on his visit, I think, something like that. And they expected a few hundred people to show up. They had 20,000. And it was like this fantastic, just celebration, right? And just, but on that march, there's LBC in radio in London, a couple of them interviewed me, but it was kind of like the whole attitude is, oh, well, yeah, but we hear they've apologized. Canada's dealt with this, right? And they never take it further than that. They never look into the history. Well, you know, the 3-minute soundbite, 3-second soundbite mentality, you never have enough time, you know, to really go into the history, and they don't see the relevance. You know, it's in the past, it's that kind of attitude that it doesn't, if it's 5 minutes before now, it has no meaning for the media. But, on the other hand, there's groups all over this country that are on board, like I'm connected with Brian Garish, Lawful Rebellion people in Liverpool who went into the court that day. I don't know if you know that story. Yeah. To me, it's very much this is connected because, you know, the Crown and the state working together caused these crimes, and they're still responsible for a lot of these assaults on children. We're documenting child trafficking.
Very connected to the Dunblane case as well. I don't know if you know about that at all.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
You said you thought we knew the story. Could you just...
Which story?
Exactly. You just said
the Birkenhead story.
Oh, Birkenhead. Somebody else who knows about it can describe it. Yeah, it was basically annulling the authority of the Crown Admiralty courts and saying under common law you don't have the right to. I think it was that they were imposing this council tax, and people in.
George. The judge refused to confirm that he was acting on his oath, as in he refused to confirm that he was being a proper judge. Because he did say if he admitted to being a proper judge, then the case would have collapsed. So he couldn't do that. So these 600 people got up and said, arrest that judge.
And they tried. They tried to arrest him, and then he got out at the last minute?
Yeah, he ran. The police.
But then they...
So they now trying to take the judge and the police.
Right.
Is it worth just giving an overview of common law? Because you said that to them, but some people might not be quite up to date with.
Somebody else talk for a while.
Go on, Nick. You can give it a bit more.
Well, my understanding, the rough common law is the only rules you really need to abide by is don't cause any harm, don't cause any loss, and do all you agree to do, so in contracts. So in cases like council tax, Roger Hayes from UK Column, they're very saying, I conditionally accept to pay you the council tax upon production of a lawful contract, which there isn't.
And that goes for things like parking tickets and anything where we haven't contracted, we can basically refuse to pay.
Conditionally accept upon production of a lawful contract. Signatures, which most of the time doesn't exist. You'll get better work most of the time.
It doesn't like it for the Canadian people, is it?
No.
Sorry.
You got
the state.
Go ahead.
Yeah, although the common law argument is very interesting, I just wanted to ask you a bit more about the sort of the film. When did the boarding school kind of stop these practices, or did they carry on and stop, or did they close altogether? When? When did it kind of stop? And like, have you encountered any kind of like whistleblowers or dissenting voices, or anyone that spoke up about it, like from within, the church or within the schools themselves?
Yep. The last school didn't close until 1996. A lot of them were phased out in the 70s and 80s. But just because they're phased out doesn't mean they don't continue. One sign of that is there are more Native children now in white foster homes than there were children in residential schools, and that's constantly increasing. There's that deculturalizing, loss of language and family identity that happens. So in effect, residential schools were privatized. The intergenerational effects, the things that are passed on dramatically, that's constantly increasing, and none of the second, third generation survivors are included in any of the settlements or discussion at all. So it's like a lot of the people suffering are just totally ignored by this. Whistleblowers in the church, well, there are, but they don't, there was one other minister who helped me in the United Church, and he faced the same thing, Bruce Gunn. And it's kind of like one of the difficulties I find approaching, and I don't want to generalize because there are people in the church who are trying to, they've actually been a good source of information for me about things that go on. But it tends to be a culture of silence, especially among the clergy, where it's understood that, and this was told to me in no uncertain terms, you just don't do anything that's going to violate the harmony and unity of the church. That's seen as bottom line. And I know in the Canadian context, I don't know what it's like here, but causing disruption, being controversial, is the worst sin possible. Even more than the harming of children. That's been my practical experience. I know in theory it's different, but the practical reality is that you're not to do that. It's a sin. It's kind of like, there's a document you should know about called Crimen Solicitanis, which the present Pope actually helped write. And it's the policy of the Vatican towards when child abuse occurs in the Catholic Church. And the policy is to treat it, what they call it, it's called imposing the pontifical secret. So it's kind of like the bishop and the priest is expected not to tell the police. Not to tell the police, that's a criminal act when the child is harmed. If you do tell the police, you face excommunication, because it's to be solved within the church, because child abuse is a sin, not a crime. It's not a felony, it's a sin as defined under that, which can be forgiven and dealt with within the church. That's, at least within the Catholic Church, the mentality. So today, the Pope is making a lot of noise about, we're going to hunt out pedophiles, we're going to get to the heart of this. How can you when you have that policy in place? It's a schizophrenic, if I'm a kind of a decent priest and I say, okay, well, I know about this case, but I'm going to get excommunicated according to this policy, but we're supposed to now, it's crazy, right? There's a case that happened just last month in Ottawa where this Archbishop Prendergast was hiding pedophile priests within his congregation, even a guy who had just come back from Thailand with child porn on his computer. And none of these guys get prosecuted. It's kind of like understood that under canon law, and there's that whole tradition here in England about that, and I found that out myself. Canon law means within the church, you get to try your own. You get to deal